I just have one story about language that I've been wanting to share. So we watch movies just because I know when I went on my mission before, I watched like The Other Side of Heaven and stuff like that, where he learned the language in a day. Like he just read the Book of Mormon with the Tongan version and he like learned it. That is so unrealistic. Like I don't want anyone to feel the way I felt when I was in the MTC because I was made to feel so terrible that I couldn't learn the language in a day or in 6 weeks. But it was about I was about 9 months in the mission, which you would think was enough time to learn the language, but all my companions had been senior companions, so they all knew the language super well. And I was put in a position where my companion was the STL, and then it was like split STL. So the STL is like a sister training leader. So mine went on exchange with someone else, and I got the other STL's companion who was a week in the mission. And she was a Filipino, but she didn't know our language. She knew a different one. And we just went, and it was in my area. So I was like, okay. So we just went to one of our investigators, and he was a very hard investigator in the fact that he read the entire Book of Mormon, like all the way through in like 2 weeks. And he was very interested, but he had a lot of questions that were like difficult, like who is Heavenly Father's father? Like stuff like that. Like, I don't even know that in English. Like, I don't know, you're asking hard questions. And so I remember it was the first time I had ever really realized that I didn't know the language as well as I did, as well as I thought I did. Because like when you're with your companion, you just like look at your companion and like, what? And then they explain to you like really quick what happened. Like, oh, he just asked this. So we walked into his apartment or into his house, and he just started rapid fire, like all these questions that he had about reading Jacob. And I sat down and I looked at my companion, and she looked at me with the same like, what did he just say, look? And I was like, oh my goodness, like I can't do this. I don't know the language well enough to answer his questions. And so I was like, hey brother, can I pray really fast before we start? And in my life, that was the most sincere prayer I ever prayed. I was like, Heavenly Father, I cannot tell him what he needs to know because I don't know the language well enough. I was like, please help me. And I said it out loud, and I was so sincere. And I just remember feeling like I can't do this on my own. But I also didn't have one of those experiences where I had the language for like, perfectly. I understood everything perfectly and I spoke perfectly. Because we hear, those are the stories that are like famous, like where they have the spirit of the gift of tongues for like 5 minutes, and then when they leave, they forget it. Or, they realize like, oh, that was the gift of tongues. That didn't happen in that like story. We just sat there and he kept asking questions, and I still didn't know the language any better than I did before. But the Spirit told me what I needed to know, like what he was asking. And so I didn't understand necessarily what he was saying, like all the words he was asking, but the Spirit told me how to answer. And that was the most like important lesson for him, because he committed to come to church like from that lesson. And so sometimes I think as new missionaries in a new place with a new language, we get so overcome with how much we don't know about the language, and we feel bad because we don't have those experiences like, oh, maybe I'm not worthy enough, or maybe I'm not with the Spirit enough so that I can have the gift of tongues as perfectly as they show in movies, or as people have in, stories in the Ensign. But to me, like, the Spirit will always tell you what you need to know when you need to know if you're ready to listen. But that doesn't mean you're always going to know the language or that you're going to understand everything perfectly. Because even at, the end of my mission, I was pretty fluent in the language, but there are some words I didn't know, and there are some words I don't remember. So the gift of tongues is different than some people make us to feel like it needs to be, especially as new missionaries. So, yeah. That was a moving experience for my mission.